Welcome to A Court of Transformation and Awakening. I'm Lorrie Gray.
And I'm Amanda Grace Harrison.
And today we are discussing Chapter 13. Back to what we're talking about.
13.
Okay. So end of last chapter, we find that where she wanted to go to was the study.
The study.
And we learn that this is because she believes that the only way to warn her family about this sickness is by sending them a letter, which presents some logistical challenges for
someone who can't read and write.
Yes. we have a little bit of a barrier to the plan here.
My first note is when she pulls a little Scarlett O'Hara when they get to the study, and she's, I couldn't think about the casual power he'd just shown, the graceful carelessness with which he'd brought so many flames to life when he just, all the candles, hundreds of candles, just magically light up when they come into the room. I had to focus on the task at hand.
Yeah.
Focus.
Magic.
And powerfulness. Powerful beast men.
Yes. It's such a good one. Yeah, I mean, their relationship, it is so interesting. I mean, he is so powerful. And I love so many times where she's like, yeah, I'm just not going to think about it.
Yeah. Can't think about that right now.
Just can't think about that right now.
On the task at hand.
Which, okay, we talked about this a little bit in the group session today, which is the concept of avoidance.
Yeah.
And
avoider.
I think things like avoidance and people pleasing and all of that, it gets a little bit of a bad rap as like oh, well, if you realize you're avoiding things, just stop. But when we understand that avoiding anything is a self-protective mechanism, I think then we can understand the avoidance and decide whether or not the most loving thing to do is to address it head on or to not. Because sometimes there are things, and sometimes it's just I'm not willing to deal with this right now because it doesn't sound fun.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes there's a truth and an honesty in recognizing that we are at our limits and that we don't have the capacity to dive into things. I mean, I joke all the time. I'm like, I've got a list a mile long of like things to dive into for myself at some point, but I don't have the capacity to dive into all of them right now. Like I know what my next step is and what my current work is. And whenever I'm through that current work, I'll go on to the next thing. But I'm not in a place to address every deep wound all at once. And so we can call it avoidance, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it's in a way that's detrimental. But I think sometimes there's also a wisdom in recognizing we have limited bandwidth.
We do. And I love the idea of partnering with our nervous system in even deciding which of those things need to be not avoided anymore, and which of those things we're still protecting our vulnerable bits by avoiding those things.
Absolutely. Like, and how to do that nervous system partnering work. I do a lot with, and again, because I think that when we don't take personal experience into account, there is this just stop it mentality sometimes in the personal development world. It's like, oh, you're avoiding it? Well, quit.
Yeah.
Just get out there and do it.
All your problems will be solved.
Just get out there and do it. And it's like, no, because if the thing that you're doing, if you're not at a place to be able to self-regulate through it, you're really going to be re-traumatizing yourself.
True.
And and so whenever I teach this to people, I have this whole like graphic thing, and I do it a lot with entrepreneurs where it's like we have our set of activities that are non-triggering, that kind of like comfort zone stuff. And then we have activities that are so far outside of what we're able to do that it's too much. It's that place where we go to shut down, where we go to freeze, where we go to, I can't regulate through this, and I'm going to be not sleeping for weeks. And then there's stuff that's in a zone where it causes a small response, but we are able to do an exhale. We're able to regulate through it. We're able to use those tools and work through it. And I always encourage people to pick like one activity that's in the self-regulation zone and engage with that until it feels safe before they do another one. But when you make life decisions based on like inspirational Instagram memes, sometimes we can get the idea that success means just like throwing ourselves so far outside of it. And typically that just leads to so much like chaos in our nervous system that ends up being this like go forward and then have to pull all the way back, and we create this pendulum swing of like, I'm going to work myself up to like throw myself outside of my comfort zone, but it's so far out that I can't self-regulate. Okay, now pull back and do nothing for however, because I just like burnt myself out. Okay, now work yourself up, get out of your comfort zone. Oh my gosh, this is so awful. Okay, let me pull back.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, what's the activity that is stretching but you can regulate through? Can we do that? And can we stop labeling the rest of it as this like automatic negative? Because sometimes it's not avoidance in the sense of it being horribly negative. Sometimes it's wisdom and it's self-partnership to recognize this is outside of my ability to regulate. And it's not saying I'm not ever going to get to it. I'm just not ready for it today. And we're still moving forward. Anyway, so all that to say, I think there are a lot of things that people label avoiding that I wouldn't even put that label on. I think sometimes it's self-love and it's wisdom to pace ourselves.
That's a much nicer way of looking at it. And it's not labeling it. Because labeling it avoiding is another label.
It is. So with her right here, when she's like, okay, I'm just not even going to think about that. I don't know. I mean, like, she's had so many changes.
Sure is.
I mean, there's a chance right here where I'm like, I don't know, maybe this is avoiding, or maybe this was actually just self-love because she's had so many changes and she's maybe just not quite ready. Because I mean, right now, she's still like, oh my gosh, there's this like sickness. Is my family safe?
Yeah, she's thick in it.
As long as she gets to it at some point. Yeah, that was a good one. Okay, so still early in this chapter, we hear a little bit more about her relationship to her illiteracy. And I love that she was able to say, like, it wasn't entirely my fault.
Yeah.
And she had a little bit of perspective, right? It's like, you know, even before her downfall, her mother had neglected her education. She didn't have a governess. Then came the poverty, you know, all of these things. And it's sort of a mix of compassion for like, this is why it's not totally my fault, and a little bit of other things. But here's the interesting thing. She starts off here in a place where I feel like her reasoning sort of makes sense. But by the end of like 2 paragraphs later, she's way off track. Yeah. She's like, okay, so if I ask them to write this, one, they're going to judge me. Mm-hmm. And Lucian would definitely just burn it. And so basically the only solution here is I have to learn how to do this myself.
No.
And I was just laughing at that. I'm like, oh my goodness. This is like how our brains work whenever we feel like we're being so logical.
Yeah. It's true. And when you can watch it in her thinking, you're like, oh boy.
And she's like, well, but then obviously this, and then this, and this. So ergo, my only solution is to do it myself. And she's like, makes sense. And then she operates off of that as if that's the truth of her situation. When those of us outside of it were like, not actually.
Because she didn't even think about asking Alice. Alice has seemed to be, I can't remember at this point if Alice is, like, she's given her some good advice. She seems to genuinely care about her. I don't know why she didn't even think about asking.
Right?
Alice,
I mean, that's
to help.
That's
that
an
seems
entirely
like a logical option.
See, and I hadn't even thought about that one. Yeah, but like stepping outside the situation is like, you know, there are other creative solutions other than asking these two people.
Yeah.
Which again, her reason not to ask them is based more on her own lenses of self-judgment than what's actually happening from them. It's projecting, it's fortune telling, it's...
Yes. And she said, asking them to write it would be too humiliating. Mm-hmm. I could hear their words, typical ignorant human. And then she just takes it on herself to do something she can't do.
Logically, I just have to do it.
I have to learn how to read real quick and write so that I can write this note to my family.
This is the only thing.
That makes sense.
I tell you what, this is one of the reasons why I love and believe in coaching. It's not this idea that here's this person that's outside of me that knows all the answers or that they need to know the answers. And I think sometimes coaching is presented that way, like I need to hire somebody because I can't trust myself.
Yeah.
I think one of the most helpful parts about coaching is to have to say these things out loud. Because sometimes I'll watch people, like they'll say it out loud, and as soon as the thought that's in their brain comes out of their mouth, they catch it. They're like, oh, that doesn't make much sense, does it? But when it was just floating around in their brain, it made sense to them.
Yeah.
And like that this is obviously just how it works. And they didn't question it. And then whenever they say it, sometimes they catch it then. And sometimes the most powerful things I do as a coach is just repeat back to them exactly what they've said. Or just clarify. I'm like, okay, so what I heard from you is this. And I say it back to them. Is that what you meant? And it's funny to watch people get this look on their face, which sometimes they give me like the stink eye, which I love. But they're like, well, when you say it, it sounds stupid. I'm like,
No offense.
I'm like, I wasn't meaning for it to sound like that's, you know, and they're like, but they have that moment of realizing that their logic was actually not really logical. It was more emotional. It was because it feels true, it must be true, that emotional reasoning. And yeah, or, you know, just, but the space to show up, let our thoughts come out in real time and have somebody reflect it back to us so that we can see, and really to be that mirror for what we're saying. Sometimes it's one of the most powerful things. And it's not about having a guru. It's about that I think we all need space to do that. Otherwise, we just believe our own illogical logic and think that we're operating. It's like, no, this totally makes sense.
Yes. Until I say it out loud.
Until I say it out loud.
Especially with someone else listening.
Oh, and then we realize it doesn't. Okay. All right. So, but this is what she believes she has to do. So she works on it. Okay. Now I have to say, this next session, she's like, okay, I had to take a break for dinner and sleep, but then I was back in the study before the dawn had fully risen. And girl is working so hard. I mean, talk about some tenacity here. And she's doing her very best to work through these things on her own, and she's working really hard. I don't know, like this just stood out to me so much. I'm like, I feel like a lot of people do give up on things pretty quickly. Like very few people have the tenacity or the emotional resilience, or I like the phrase failure tolerance. Like most of us have a very low tolerance for failing. Most of us have a very low tolerance for struggling. We have a very low tolerance for doing things that are hard. And it's like I just had to give credit to her. Like she's sitting there and every bit of this is hard and she's just like keeping going. Yeah, one of the questions that I asked, and I tried for it to not be like judgy, but when people come in and they say, oh my gosh, I've just tried everything. And I will question, I'm like, list them. Like, what do you mean? Like, what is everything? Tell me everything you've tried. Okay, most of the time it's 3 to 5 things. 3 to 5 things is I tried everything.
Yeah.
And it's that space where like that feels true, and they feel like I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, we live in a world where there's a million things. Like we've tried 4. We're not even close to everything. You know, with my healing, people are like, what did you do? I'm like, it was not 1 thing. It was not 3 things. It was not 25 things. I'm like, it was 500 things or more. I'm like, if I actually listed them, it's probably 1,000 things that I tried over the course of a decade.
Yeah.
And I'm still, even now, it's like I will improve, and then I'm always continuing to try things. Yeah, but that ability to try it and it not work and try again, so many of us just have a really low tolerance for that. But not our girl. Day and night.
Not Vera.
Just going through it. Anyway, so I love her for that. I love her for her tenacity. Okay, but she does have to take a break, and she gets up and she sees this mural on the wall depicting the story of Prynthia, which is super cool. So we kind of get to understand a little bit of the backstory of the I'm trying to say country. Country's not the word. Of the world.
The
world
she lives
the
in.
world of the world she lives in. We get to understand that. And one of the things that we learn, and I don't know if I couldn't tell from this if she understood this already, and this is just now as readers we're learning it, or if this was her first understanding that Prynthia is divided into courts, so that we've got autumn, summer, winter.
Yeah, it seems like she didn't know that.
Do you think so? I think she didn't know it.
She had no idea.
and then the dawn, day, night. And she starts to understand that she is likely in the spring court. Where is that? I can't find that in here. I didn't mark it. But she gets to see the way that it is all divided up into this patchwork of territories. Yeah, but this was, you and I had talked about this. We talked about maybe doing an entire podcast episode on this, but this brought up something that we have talked about before, which is that we like these books because of how it's connected to seasons and moon cycles, and how that's been an ongoing theme, like in our relationship and how we do things. And we're bringing it into the group with having people set intentions on the new moon and checking in on those intentions on the full, and then revisiting them again on the new moon. And that's something you've done for ages. Like, remind me, like, where did you learn about that? How did you get into all of that? Because whenever I first met you, like, you were like, hey, let's do a new moon mastermind, which again was weird to me. I'm like, why? Because I'm like, no, you start with the calendar, like June 1st.
Yeah.
But doing it on the moon cycles was so powerful for me because it helped me start connecting with my own like 28-day cycle. But when did you first get interested in?
I know it may have been from Ezzie Spencer. It might be Dr. Ezzie Spencer, I'm not sure, but she has a book called Lunar Abundance. But I was following her for a while before then, and I just loved. She had been like in finance world and like totally unrelated to anything woo woo, and then I forget why she started noticing. She had to, for some reason, follow these cycles. And then she just noticed that it really mirrored her own personal energy cycles. And so I was following her, like just on her email list, I think, and she would send out interesting stuff. And I just started to notice it. And then I got her book and tried like, oh, I'm going to try this. Like, because it gets very detailed into like, okay, waning crescent lasts this many days, and then waxing crescent. And then you do these, like, these are your exhales and inhales, you know, like your active days, and then you plan your, and when I looked at it, I'm like, boy, if I really did that throughout the month, what I love about it is, you know, the rest is coming and you know the work. So it's never like, because I tend to get, oh boy, I'm having a lazy down energy day, and I kind of feel like I'm going to be stuck in that forever. Like, what if I never come back out and never have another active, or what if it takes a couple years and I just go into a depression and I spiral down? But knowing that it's like really normal throughout the month to have this active pause, active rest, stress, recuperate, and that's how nature works. That's how everything works in cycles. I found so much hope in that I was like, okay, I'm gonna not feel so bad about and then I'm not gonna feel like when I get a little manic, I tend to be like, oh no, now I'm manic, I'm gonna be crazy until I work myself to death. But I think, no, what if I purposely start resting before I need it, just because I know that it's time for that in the cycle.
It's very helpful. So good. It's so good. I know, and I realized for myself that so many personal development books that I was reading were written by men, and that men have a 24-hour hormonal cycle and women have a 28-day hormonal cycle. And when somebody's like, this is what I do, and I do this consistently every day, and it works great, refiltering that through, because you have a 24-hour hormonal cycle. You don't have a 28-day hormonal cycle, and it's not going to work the same for both groups. And I think having to learn to either filter that information or stop learning from people who are thinking that because it works for them, it works for everybody, and moving into those cycles. But when we started doing that, our first group, our new moon mastermind, it was really the first time that I started connecting with my shifts in energy and my hormonal cycles. And at the time, my hormones were kind of off. So my shifts were extreme, and towards, you know, the menstrual part of my cycle, I mean, I felt it wasn't just like chill. It was kind of depressed. Yeah. It got kind of dark. And then, yeah, towards ovulation, it wasn't just like confident energy. It was kind of manic. And it was really far up and down because things were not, because things were imbalanced in my body. So I was experiencing those really extremely. But every time it happened, though, it caught me off guard because I wasn't tracking it. I didn't see it coming. Yeah. And I remember being down and all the time being like, what's wrong? Like, what's wrong with me? And again, same thing. It's like, is this going to last forever? What happened? And I'm doing all of this like deep work. And then, moving into the next part of my cycle, and be like, oh my gosh, like I'm better. Oh my gosh, I'm worse. Oh my gosh, I'm better.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Always a surprise.
it was such a roller coaster and I couldn't track it. And when we started doing this and we were meeting, I don't even know how many months we did it, but we always met on the same moon. I started noticing, every time right around this meeting, my energy is about the same. And 2 weeks ago, it was like different. And I started seeing the things. And that's where I came up with the concept of period thoughts, which I teach to all my clients, because during the time I was also journaling, like doing a thought download every single day, where like stream of consciousness. And it got to where I would wake up and I would write down my thoughts, and they were so horrible. And it was like, everybody hates you. Everybody hates you. Nothing will ever work out. And it would really be better for like the planet if you just like crawled into a hole and didn't come out. Like, this is kind of what my thoughts sounded like. And rather than going to what's wrong, I'm like, oh, those are those thoughts that my brain has every month right around this time. Wow. And I was like, period thoughts. And I would just like label them. And so I could wake up and I could have this set of thoughts. And instead of going to what's wrong, how long is this going to last? What is wrong with me? I'm like, oh, that's a thing that my brain does around this time of the month every time. And it's no big deal. And it's going to pass. And nothing's gone wrong. And nothing's wrong with me. And they were still there and they didn't feel great. They felt kind of heavy, but there wasn't all of this like secondary additional thought trauma on top of it.
I love that.
It was
so good.
It was life-changing to start connecting with these sorts of seasons.
Yeah. And to know that they've been going on our whole lives, and we could have been like, it's hard to go, man, I wish I'd known about these when I was little. I'll think of all the drama.
It would be nice. Like, it would be nice if this was taught more often, for sure. And really practical things came out of it. Like, I don't make decisions about my business near ovulation or the menstrual part of my cycle.
Smart.
Because in both of those phases, if I make business decisions around ovulation, I'm convinced I can do everything.
Yes.
And it all needs to happen yesterday.
Yeah.
And it's like, and sometimes my brain even goes to like, we could just like sleep less.
Yes.
And make it all happen.
Accomplish so much more.
And then, 2 weeks later, I'm like, we should probably do nothing.
Yes.
I don't even know if we can handle what we're sharing. And so if I'm actually going to make decisions about my business, I do it never at those 2 points. There's like 3 days, it's like 6 days a month, like about 3 here and about 3 on the other side, where I just don't make decisions because I know that my emotions in those phases aren't trustworthy.
Right. like drunk dialing people, drunk texting. Don't do it.
Sorry, it's like sorry, I was
decisions
I was ovulation planning.
Yes. We're gonna have to renegotiate all of that.
Oh my word. But as a larger, whole, like with emotions, I think that the point that you made is so helpful. And sometimes I have to remind myself where I'm like, any emotion that I experience is valid. And I think all emotions carry useful information, but none of them are permanent.
Yeah. Everything is cyclical.
Yeah. And but there are moments when we're in an emotion that really sucks and we have that thought of like, it's going to last forever. I'm like, nope, none of them do. They never do. Nothing. It always shifts and change. It always shifts and changes. Like, just the passage of time is going to do that. Even if we don't do any deep work, it's going to shift. But that reminder of like, this is not permanent is so helpful when we're in it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love it. So
cycles.
It was part of why we love this book. We love that, it brings in some of those things that were a part of our friendship and our connection.
And I would really like to be able to go, looking at this map.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to be able to go to Prynthia and go to like, depending on your mood, because I do like the idea of like, I think that I love spring and summer, but then when I think about never getting to go to autumn and winter, I really like visiting those places. And the idea of being able to visit all of them within a day or two. They didn't have airplanes. They have some flying beings in some of these courts, we find out eventually, but like, to be able to visit them even in the course of a week or a month and to go visit all of the seasons, that'd be so fun.
Oh my goodness.
I like that idea a lot.
We should
summer vacation and then a winter vacation.
It's like Disney Epcot where you can visit the different
Yes,
place.
different countries all in one place. These are all
Hey, does anybody out there have like multi-million dollars that they would like to invest in our idea to create
yeah.
various courts
Build
that we can
our
physically
own
that we can
model of
physically
Prynthia.
visit?
That would be awesome.
Wouldn't that be awesome? Somebody out there. Somebody out there.
Let's do it.
We got the vision. If you got the
Turn it into a
cash.
theme park.
It would be the coolest theme park ever. Okay. So Tamlin comes in and he offers, like, he realizes what she's doing, why she's in the study and what's happening, and he offers, like, I could help you write to them if that's why you're in here. And this is an interesting exchange where, again, this is a straightforward, sincere, helpful offer.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh my goodness, they would burn it. I don't even know how I'll get the letter to them. And he's offering, like, I can help you write to them, obviously, and send it. And it's genuine. And she's so resistant. She's feeling panic. Her face is hot. She feels so much embarrassment. Help?
Good.
You mean a fairy is passing up the opportunity to mock an ignorant mortal?
Yeah.
And we see here, like, his jaw's tight. Like, he's really bothered by this. And what he comes back with is, why should I mock you for a shortcoming that isn't your fault? Let me help you. I do this for the hand. And again, maybe not the best word choice, but she misses the fact that he's like, let me help. She misses that he's like, this is not a thing that's your fault. Like, he's very much like, okay, you didn't learn to read. Like,
Yeah.
What do we do now? And she gets caught up on shortcoming.
Shortcoming. It was a shortcoming.
It was a shortcoming. Oh my gosh. And this next paragraph, to reveal how little I truly knew, to let him see that part of me that was still a child, unfinished and raw. I'm fine.
I'm fine.
I'm fine.
You're not going to see that part of me, Mr. Beast.
You will not see this. And, and this is obviously, self-protective, but we just get to see her story about this and how much that is impacting. Like, there is an offer for help here, and it's sincere, it's kind, it's helpful, and she just cannot take it. And it's not about him. It's about what she's able to handle and about what she would make his help mean about her. It's about how she would feel if that part of her was revealed. And again, I don't think any of us need to be, okay, vulnerability is great. But at the same time, I don't think there's this push of, like, we should be vulnerable with everybody right away. Like,
Yeah, especially people that she has good reason to not
barely
trust.
know. Like, I totally get, I'm not saying, like, oh my gosh, she should have immediately opened up to this person that she barely knew. It's just interesting to notice how her interpretation of events, her thoughts about events, her lens that she viewed herself through, what she would have made all of this mean, how this impacted her reactions and decisions. Because that's always how it works.
Yeah.
Man. And then we see more of it on the next page. We get a little bit more insight too into how some of this developed. Coming back to relationship with her sister. She says, I could almost feel the wound deep in my chest as it ripped open, and all those awful silent words came pouring out. Illiterate, ignorant, unremarkable, proud, cold. All spoken from Nesta's mouth, all echoing in my head with her sneering voice.
Thanks, Nesta.
Thanks, sis. Thanks, sis. Just really, really appreciate that.
And who knows if Nesta even called her any of those. I really can't picture her calling her some of those, but maybe she did. But more likely it was just like Nesta's energy.
It could have been. I'm curious about that too. I'm like, was this taking one thing that she said and adding things? Was she then interpreting things? Were these direct things, and or were they things like what Tamlin said, where he's like, why would I mock you for a shortcoming that wasn't your fault? And then she's like, okay, shortcomings,
Yeah. That's all
Now, knowing how direct Nesta is, I wouldn't be surprised. Like, she's got a sharp tongue. I would not be surprised if a lot of these things were said in a direct way that was hurtful. But we also know what we've seen is that Feyre has the capacity to pull out the bits that are congruent with the story that she has about herself,
Yeah.
and latch onto that. So, Nesta could have been saying like, what are you too proud for this or this or that? And which could have been a question. Like, I don't know. I'm just trying to imagine scenarios. But we're not quite sure how this developed, but she's got this whole laundry list of self-shaming words that pour out whenever there's a small trigger.
Yeah. Easily triggered.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and then I love, okay, so the next page, this idea of shortcomings. So, like, she's just sitting there by herself now, and like, shortcomings come up again. She's like, oh my gosh, just another one of my shortcomings. And then this is interesting. She then goes into, now I'm mad at him. She's like, shame on me for feeling a shred of pity for him. I just
Thinking that he might be able to relate.
Yeah, I stupidly thought he would care in my ignorant, insignificant human way. And then there's this anger, which, gosh, it's so much easier sometimes to feel that than the other things that we're feeling.
Yeah. Anger. Anger's good. Well, anger is higher, I forget, on that hierarchy of emotions, like if you're feeling really down here, then you reach for the next, just one higher on that ladder. And anger is higher than depression. So if you are in a depressed state and you're wanting to move up the ladder, it is better to get angry. So get angry, Feyre. It's better than feeling hopeless and depressed. At least it gives you a little bit of energy.
It's active. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of us are taught that, being angry is always bad. I don't think being angry is always bad. I have also heard and believe that anger is always a secondary emotion. And usually because there's some part of us that feels
hurt underneath.
Hurt or helpless or weak or vulnerable in some way. And that anger is a protective first line of defense. And it's if you encounter my anger, you don't have to see this part of me that's wounded. I don't know. Have we talked about, or have you done, are you familiar with like parts work, internal family systems?
Mm-mm.
Okay. There's a book out there by Dr. Charles Schwartz. Is it Dr.? No, I always say the wrong name. Richard Schwartz. I don't know. Dr. Schwartz, called No Bad Parts. And he has this whole way of breaking down, emotions, and he talks about how we have, it's not just emotions, but parts of ourselves. As we said, we have parts of ourselves. And he talks about how we have parts that are exiled, like parts that we don't want anybody to see, parts that we think are bad, parts that we think are wrong, that we've kind of like kicked out of the scenario. And then we have parts of us that are firefighters and parts of us that are managers. And managers are sort of like the front line of defense. And this might be things like perfectionism or control, or just like, if I can present this front, then you'll never get to that place where you see this part of me that I don't want anybody to see. And then if kind of that first line of defense fails and there's a chance of somebody accidentally seeing our exiled parts, that's where like the firefighters come out. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's anger, sometimes that's addiction. But the things where it's like, oh my gosh, somebody almost saw it, like what's the thing that comes out? Like you cannot see this part of me over here that is weak and vulnerable, or this part that I don't believe is okay. It's got to hide. And it's not. And some people, their exiled part is their angry part. So like that's the part that they think is totally not okay. And so there's something else that comes out so that we don't see that. I love parts work. Internal family systems is another name for it. But the book being that like there are no bad parts, which again was a huge influence as I developed some of my own coaching theories around self-partnership, where as soon as we think that anything, anger or depression or whatever, is bad and we have to get rid of it, it creates this conflict within ourselves. But when we can understand that when we start with the fundamental assumption that there aren't any bad parts, and we're just seeking to understand and partner with those parts of ourselves and move forward together, there's so much less resistance. There's so much less angst. There's so much less unnecessary pain. And that shift makes that shift in emotional energy towards what we're finding, I think, is so significant.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
It's a good framework.
Yeah. But she goes with Gosh, you almost saw this part of me that embarrasses me. I think you're just an idiot.
Yeah. Should have just let your hand bleed.
Should have just
that
let you
night,
bleed
damn it.
out. I should have known better. Oh, goodness. All born out of her own self-protection. Though again, these are all things, guys, by the way, like where this is sort of a take on it and like a off the cuff thoughts about it. And a lot of these episodes were just like, hey, what's like the first thought that came to our head? Like, we're not planning these out. So some of you are going to listen to this and be like, oh my goodness, I interpreted that this entirely other way. Like, we want to hear that. Like, that's the point. And it's why we're posting these in a community with the ability to comment on them and share thoughts. So if you're like, hey, I read that an entirely different way, tell us so we can all learn together. Okay. Yeah. And so then we shift into Tamlin leaves. Feyre goes and seeks out Lucien, whatever his name is. Did we find out which one it is?
Lucien.
Not Lucien. Lucien. Oh my gosh. I will probably get that wrong every time. Sorry. I read this the other way for too many years. And they have this vague conversation about her wanting to trap the Suriel to get information from him.
Because if you trap the Suriel, it will tell you anything you need to know. It will answer any question. I like her.
Yeah, and so she has this plan to... So she gets this information from him on how to do this, and she has plans to act this out. Did you have any other things?
No, I just liked her. I can't find it. You have your secrets, and I have mine.
Right?
She's like, and it's a good thing that while you have superior hearing, I possess superior abilities to keep my mouth shut.
I highlighted that one too. That was one of those like favorite moments. She has a couple of those. There's another one coming up in like in a couple of chapters where every once in a while she has a one-liner that they make me laugh. Like you laugh out loud. Yeah, she's like, to which he responds, I think I'm starting to like you.
Yeah.
For a murdering human.
For a murdering human. Not so bad.
Because he is our person. He is not overly serious. He likes a little bit of that joking. Okay. So she now has her information. End of chapter 13. But as you all probably guessed, chapter 14, things are going to get exciting because she takes this information and she is going to put it into action. So join us back on the next chapter where we journey with Feyre into what she's going to do with to the deep dark woods.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of A Court of Transformation and Awakening podcast. And we would love for you to join us over on ACOTAR, that's ACOTAA.circle.so, where you can watch these podcasts and interact with them. You can also jump into our fan chats, become a member, post your intro, post pictures of your dog eating spaghetti, whatever it is that you want to do. And we'll see you over there. Thanks, guys. Bye.